How's everybody doing? So I'm gonna make this video in response to a commenter. We'll just say I don't know if he actually follows me or if he actually is subscribed or whatever. So I'm just gonna say a commenter. Um, he does seem to watch all my videos and he does seem to comment on most of them. So maybe he is a follower, but that's all besides the point. He asked a really good question on my last video. He wanted to know, how did we view the bros that were sex offenders on the yard? And at first I was like what? They're not on the fucking yard, you know. But then I realized that that's true because I've done most of my time in USPs, and well, better than half. Half my time was in USPs, half of it was in FCIs. And there's times that I forget about my times in the FCIs because the USPs are just, they completely overshadow any experience that I had in FCIs. You know what I mean? They're not the first, they're not forefront in my mind when I think of anything violent or extreme or but I do remember things that have to do with sex offenders because that is where we ran into that kind of crime and paperwork a lot. And the USPs, they're not going to step foot on the yard. They're not. The COs, the LTs, the SIS, they won't let them because ultimately that's on their ass. You know, they got to sign off on the bottom of the paperwork and say, I think it's okay for this person to go out. He has, demonstrated a willingness to go out there. And it's like, yeah, guys will say, yeah, let me out there, and they'll go out there and they'll get killed. And ultimately that, the buck does stop with the COs at the end of the day because they're supposed to be looking out for everybody. Right? They're supposed to be making sure that nobody is housed with anybody that they can't be around, which is a hard job to do. I don't envy that. I don't envy that at all. Um, there's no way. There's just no way to keep track of who's all what and affiliations and beefs and all this. There's just so much adversity that there's no way. But it's pretty easy to keep track of if you're a sex offender or you're hot. Your life is in your own hands if you decide to go out to those yards. But in FCIs, that's not the case. Everybody can kind of get away with, for the most part, I think they can get away with just, no one's pushing, no one's pushing the line like that. And in the few instances that I saw where they did push the line like that, they get rid of them very quickly. The administration will get rid of guys that are influential, guys that they see, people will kind of rally around. It's not hard, you know. I know that there's a couple COs that watch my channel and they comment here and there, and I know that they know they can watch. They just watch a group of guys for a little bit, and they'll be able to pick out within a matter of an hour or two. They're gonna know which one out of all of them is probably in charge. You know, it's like watching a pack of dogs. You're gonna know which one's the alpha after a while. This is no different. It's very animalistic in nature, the way that men interact with one another in those environments. But I do remember, man, I've read so much fucked up paperwork, heinous shit. When I first went to my first FCI, which was in Pekin, Illinois, 2007, And when I first got there was no structure. There was no. There was kind of a shot caller, I guess. There was just kind of somebody that just kind of gave you a rundown and welcomed you and kind of told you what wasn't expected of you there. And, basically, like, hey, we're all just doing our time here, And I was like, okay, that's cool. That's I can dig it for now. And I get to my first unit, and right away I get hooked up with, a radio, batteries, soups, coffee, stamps, shoes. They were used, but hey, it was a decent little package. Some people, everybody kind of came together and everybody looked out, and so I had everything that I needed fairly quickly, and it was cool. But one guy in particular kind of stuck to himself, and he just kind of stood around, fully khakied up, in his boots, shirt tucked in, had some weird feathered '70s hair look going. He was older, and I noticed nobody would talk to him. This was a few days had passed, and I noticed that just nobody had talked to him. And we're standing up on the top rail, and he creeps over to me and asks me what the radio station for a particular TV was, and I told him what it was, and then he asked if I had a lot of time to do. I said I did. And he was like, "Yeah, I got a lot of time to do too." And I was like, "Oh, well, that's what's up." My mom. I didn't know. What do you say? Like that sucks. Happy to hear it. Um, do better next time. I don't know. You say something. There's some kind of platitude that comes immediately to mind. I can't remember what it was, but um, it was a very short, brief conversation, and I walked off. And there was another native that stuck to himself, but he was straight, and he let me know that right away. He brought me into his room and he showed me his paperwork, and then he was like, pretty much right after showing me his paperwork, he was like, with that being said, I'm just gonna let you know now, the guy you were just talking to over there, he's no good. And I'm like, oh yeah, what do you do? He was like, I don't know. He goes, it's none of my business. He goes, but I know it had something to do with his kids. I was like, huh. And I was like, well, why is he here? Like I thought, growing up and hearing all these different stories from the streets and state prison and from guys in county that coming back from the feds, like these guys aren't supposed to be here. They're not supposed to be able to walk freely and survive. They're not supposed to make it. That's what I always thought. And he was like, yeah, but the administration here, they'll press charges on everybody. Basically they'll just kind of scared everybody off from doing anything. So everybody there was convinced that they had to leave him alone. And I suppose, you know, there was no leadership there. There was no structure. There was nobody there that was kind of rallying all the bros up and saying we need to do better. Nothing like that. It was just a bunch of guys there that everybody was just out for themselves. And so there was a good handful of sex offenders that were present on the yard. And anytime you try to ask one of these guys, well, what about him? What about him? Well, I don't know. I don't know about him. I just know I'm good and he's good and that's who I talk to and that's it. So it's like, okay. So the fact that it's not anybody's problem, somebody else will take care of it. That's it's an issue, you know. It's a mentality. It's a collective mentality that I don't like it. I don't like it because it's enablance. You know, there's a saying that I'm very fond of, and it's that for evil to like triumph or persist, all it takes is for good men to do nothing or something like that. You know, pretty much I butchered the shit out of that. I should have looked the quote up before I don't really think about how these things are going to play out. The videos, they're completely off the cuff, and I don't have to keep track of what I say or how it comes out because it's just the truth. It's the truth. It's as I remember it, and that's the good thing about this particular style of videos is just I can sit down and I can just go off the head because it's as I remember. But yeah, so everybody just acts like it's not their problem, and it is all our problem. Because the rest of these races around here, they won't fuck with us. They won't talk to us. This is a gang yard for the Midwest. So all the other minorities, the GDs and the Vice Lords and all them, they all run a tight ship. They got a bunch of guys that aren't on count, and they just either run Iowa or Illinois or whatever. They got their own little off count cars around, but yeah, they're just kind of you could feel the dismissiveness, the quickness with which they'll kind of they'll put a stop to whatever kind of conversation you're trying to have because they ultimately don't know if you're cool or not. You might be cool, but they can't take that chance. So it's a fucked up feeling, to be somewhere like that where you're looked down upon and you just ultimately feel like their shame is now our shame. That's how I felt. That's exactly how I felt. And so it was already established pretty much. There was enough people here not doing shit about it that I felt like I couldn't do shit about it. And so I knew that there was one in our unit, and I didn't know much about it for a little while. And then I finally found somebody who showed me how to use the computers, how to look up law case. And they gave me his name and the case number, and I went over to the library and I looked that shit up. And I guess I'm going to have to be careful about how I word this. But there's some things you're just never going to forget. You'll never forget exactly the details of it. I guess his daughter, she was like about 7, 8 years old, something like that. She had gotten an infection down in her, in her private area. And it got so bad that they had to take her to the doctor. And the doctor was able to conclude that the infection was only possible if it came into contact with human feces. Damn. My shit just started beating like a motherfucker. So, I guess they were able to figure out that it at least wasn't her human feces. I don't know. But it definitely caused, it was cause for questions. It was cause for concern. And I think that they pulled up he had a son too. And they pulled up the son and the daughter separately and they started, questioning them. And they were able to find out that purely because of this motherfucker, the order in which he was assaulting these children, they were able to find out that it was all related. that's how he got caught, because he took his daughter in for an infection. He didn't think that that would start to they would start to connect the dots, and so that's how he got popped. So I went back to the unit, and I looked at this motherfucker. And before, he was like super friendly, you know, and he kind of, you know, nod at me and I nod at him, you know, because before I knew what he was there for, I was at the very least cordial with him, you know, because I don't know him, and he could be anybody, you know. He could be quiet and a killer, I don't know, but you just, until you know, you just kind of give everybody the least amount of respect that you can. But they'll know, you know, and I think that that's what he was looking for. He would always look to see when he knew I knew. And I came in that day, and he kind of, you know, was kind of making his way over towards me and pulled one of his earphones off, and he looked like he was about to say something to me, and I just looked right at him. And he stopped dead in his tracks, and he was like, oh, put his headphone back on, and he just walked off. And I knew that day I was going to touch him. The way they had it set up there at Pekin is they had 2 man's regular cells with a bunk bed and everything, and they have 10 mans. They had 4 10-mans. Well, 2 10-mans and 2 8-mans. One with 5 bunks and one with 4 bunks. But the way that they do it is, if you are paying your fines and your assessment fee, anything, restitution, they take it upon themselves to charge you. I don't remember if it was monthly or quarterly or whatever it was, but I just knew I wasn't paying that shit. They aren't able to get away with it. They shouldn't be able to get away with it, because legally they are not a collection agency, but they get to keep a certain percentage of all the money that they collect on the government's behalf. So they're all about trying to fuck with you until you pay that shit off. And one of the ways that they do that is, as soon as you stop paying, they'll kick you out of your cell, and they refer to it as preferred housing. And they'll kick you out of your 2-man cell, whether you were there first or not. It wouldn't matter if you were there for 5 years or 2 years, or it don't matter. They'll kick you out of that cell, and they'll put you in a 10-man. Well, I had my own cell for about 3 months. I think it was like a quarterly payment. They take either 25 or 50 bucks, whatever they think you can pay. They'll sign a contract for it and everything. But I lost my cell, and I got put in the 10-man with him, with that son of a bitch. His last name was No Neck. I don't remember what his fucking piece of shit ass first name was, but I remember his last name was No Neck. And I want to say he was from like Pine Ridge or Rosebud, one of the two. And Rosebud's my home reservation. It's where my family's from, Spring Creek. But by the time that happened, we had gotten enough new, younger natives in with a would-be leader, to the point where when I got put in the 10-man with him, I went to him. That was Boyd. That was Boyd. I think I mentioned him in my whites and tattoos, white politics and tattoo story. This is pretty much how he got the yard, right? I just went to him and I said, hey man, I got put in the fucking same 10 man as this piece of shit. I was like, I'm gonna smash him. I'm gonna get him out of that fucking, I'm gonna get him out of that unit. I'm gonna get him off the yard. I'm gonna make him check in. And he was like, well, fuck. He's like, if you do one, let's do them all. And I was like, I don't care. I was like, you guys can do the rest. I said, have some one out of each unit or whatever. I was like, but I'm taking care of this one because I'm not living with him. I'm not gonna live with him like that. Fuck that. It was bad enough I tolerated him while he was in my unit because he could stay far enough away from me and fucking look down away from me every time I walked by. But now I am not sleeping in the same fucking room as this motherfucker. I'm not. And he was like, all right. He's like, we'll throw a quick meeting together. We'll get volunteers. One fell swoop. All of them. All at the same time. And I was like, all right, cool. So for the rest of that night, they were getting smashed. They were all getting smashed. Every other unit, or yeah, every other hour or so, one would fucking get hit. Some of them were just checking in and they were taking off. And I wanted to wait. I wanted to wait until we locked down for the night. I wanted him to myself, where he couldn't run. And yeah, we locked down for that night. And I always remember this big GD out of Chicago. His name was Big G. He was a funny dude. He was hilarious. He was always making us crack up and shit. And he said some shit because they were getting ready. I forget what they said. Because all the other guys in that 10 man, they would kind of joke with him. They'd include him, in some of the humor. And he'd kind of laugh, and he'd really try to joke back a little bit. But when I got put in there that day, he was quiet. He stayed out of the room. And I had known Big G for some time already, but he had all his family pictures up on the top bunk, so that when he laid down and he looked up, that he just had a little mural of all his family and stuff. And everybody does that, right? Everybody does that. And we locked down for that night, and they were joking about something. And I remember they said something to him, and then they said something to me. And they were like, huh, White Eyes. And I was like, hey man, don't fucking, I said, don't include me in anything with that dude over there. I know you guys are joking and stuff. I was like, but don't even include me in any conversation to do with that fucking piece of shit right there. And they were like, oh? They were like, damn, dog, it's like that? I was like, yeah, it's like that. And I started fucking putting my shoes on. I put a bunch of my stuff into my drawer, and I shut my drawer and I stood up. And they were like, what's up, man? What you got going on? White Eyes, talk to us. And I was like, this motherfucker right here, man. I said, this motherfucker hard at his own kids. I said, did you know that? I said, did you tell him that? You're joking around and he and ha-ha'n with them. Did you tell him what you did to your son, to your daughter? I said, you didn't tell him all that, did you? I said, did you? And this dude literally rolled over. He had his headphones on. He was sitting there with his head down. And I'm kind of slowly coming towards him from across the dorm. And he sat back and he rolled over and he kicked his feet up. He literally rolled over like he was just gonna go to sleep, and I wasn't gonna do nothing to him. I was like, nah, this is the night. You're gonna learn tonight. You're gonna fucking learn tonight. And I said, look at me when I fucking talk to you. And I went over there and I fucking smacked him hard as fuck right on his face. Wow. And I grabbed him by his shirt and I pulled him off his bed and I started punching him. And he didn't fight back at all. He just immediately started trying to cover his face. And he said, I'll go. He said, I'll go. And I punched him up a couple more times, and I said, "You're damn right, you're gonna fucking go." I said, "Get your ass on that fucking door and kick until they come for you." Big G was like, it was all super tight. It was all like super quiet, really tense. And Big G said, he said, "Damn, Chief, you were just gonna let me have my fucking pictures all up here like that? You weren't gonna say nothing?" He started snatching his pictures down. And I was like, "Damn, man." I was trying to hold my fucking I was trying to keep a serious face at that moment, but he almost made me start laughing. And he did. No Neck turned around and he started fucking beating that door. Boom, 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 boom. We sat there for about 10 minutes, all red faced, crying and shit. He started to try to grab his shit, and I told him, I said, "Don't even grab your shit. You got nothing. You'll take with you to the shoe what you have on you right now." And he came, they opened up the door, and it's like they already knew what was going on. They pulled him out, they locked it, and they walked off. And that's how we started a clean yard for the natives there. And I don't know. Actually, I think there are some bros that watch my channel that were there at that time in Pekin, but that's how Pekin started. That's how Pekin started, how it became clean for the natives anyways. We got rid of all of them all at the same time. And every time one touched down after that, it was immediately smashed. And it took a second for the administration to catch on and say, "Oh, okay, you guys don't want them no more, all right." And they let it go. They let it pass. I never thought that. I thought, it's my first joint and stuff, so I don't really know what to expect from them. I didn't know what it was like to know when they were letting something happen and when they weren't, until they really stopped letting something happen, And when they got rid of me, that's when they had stopped letting it happen. But to answer your question, jaywalking 1992, up to that point, I guess, they didn't exist to us. We didn't notice them. We knew who they were, and they stayed away from us. They knew they ostracized themselves, and they didn't include themselves with us in any capacity. I think they sat with the Christians as well. They had their own table. But nobody was putting in work up to that point. They were the work. He said something like, "I suppose nobody minded if they were putting in work." It's like, nah, they are the work. If they're walking around, ain't no work getting put in. If what Oxford is another one. It's another place that I had to tolerate their presence. But that's a story for another day. Try to keep this one short. If you like what you hear, as always, like, comment, subscribe, share. Talk to you later.